Right. So today's lesson is on negotiable instruments. I presume you as bankers have heard about what negotiable instruments are. We more than negotiable instruments, we have heard the term or the terminology as checks. Um, why we need to study this? Why do we need to get to know about these negotiable instruments? Are of so many reasons. Uh, with the practical interaction that I have had with the bankers as of now, I am somewhat um, not satisfied with the knowledge the bankers have with regard to these negotiable instruments. Not to say everyone, but with regard to in general context, I am not that satisfied. However, since of late we see a trend in the knowledge towards the upward side, which is a good thing. But then again, they say in a very celebrated case where the courts observe that with regard to the law, the practice of negotiable instruments, it is not from a lawyer that you need to ask that. You need to ask that from a banker, the court observed. So that is the expectation of the legal system as well as the judiciary then and now, and will be for some time forward as well. So it's quite important that us, the bankers, understand what this is, why do we use this, what's the importance of this, etc. Right? The why negotiable instruments? Why is it important? Now, how did it all started? What's so special about negotiable instruments? Now, yes, now we are in the 21st century. We as bankers we use so many what do you call payment methods. What are the payment methods the bankers use? Bankers allow the customers to use payment methods. One example I will let you know. Uh, One method is credit cards. It's a particular method where any customer who has a credit card can go to whoever the merchants who accepts the credit cards and buy goods or services and pay with their credit card. Do they have money with them at the point of purchase of that good or services? No. But they have this piece of plastic where you can purchase. So it's as good as money or sometimes better than money. What are the others, other payment methods of that sort? This is something I expect from you, the class. I don't want this to be a boring lecture, right? Sometimes it's itself is considered boring, the topic of law. So you need to put your thinking hats on and tell me what are the other, you can type it down, methods of payments bankers or the banks provide, facilitates to the customers. Krishni? Yes. I believe it's for a reason that you have joined this, because this interaction will not be available even if you give the meeting later on. So, what are the other payment methods? A bank or the bank facilitates to the customers. Credit card I mentioned. What else? Electronic funds transfers, checks. The obvious, yes, good. Tarushi, what else? What are the others? Then now you get apps as well. You get phone apps. Then you get online transfers, online transactions, etc., etc. So you have all these paper and non-paper methods of transacting. with the clients and the customers and the merchants as well. Now, what is quite interesting in mobile banking, correct? Very good. Interesting in about the negotiable instruments are, unlike the other stuff, other areas, the law and practice of negotiable instruments did not start or originated from an act of parliament or statute. It started or originated from the merchants or Belendas, we say, right? These traders in the 15th and the 16th century, right? That is in 1400s to 1500s, quite some time. So what we are discussing now is not something new. It's something which was there for centuries, and it's centuries and centuries old, right? So why actually do you need negotiable instruments? I will give you an example of the reason. Let's say John is in England who owes money to, let's say, Albert, who is in France. He owes Albert, let's say, £100 or the equivalent. Those days when they all started all these things, the currency was such that it was not currency notes, it was gold and silver. So let's assume John owed 100, let's say, hypothetical 100 grams of or one gold bar to Albert, who was in France. Now, let's say at the same time, Albert, who was in France, owed money or currency to that value equivalent to Henry, who was in England. Now, John and Henry are two different individuals who don't know each other. John owes money to Albert, who is in France. Albert owed money to the same amount to Henry, who was in England. Now, in a typical transaction, what happens? John would have to send the money to Albert to France. And in turn, Albert, who had to settle the currencies, would have to send that money back again to Henry, who was in England. Now, unlike these days, sending and receiving money is not that simple. You would have to physically send that. Like I said, those days it was currency, gold and silver in bars, and you could lose the amount in transit. There could be theft, vandalism, whatnot. And again, it's not as quick as today, because it's sea, right? It's sea voyages, and you have to wait for some time. And this some time doesn't mean a couple of hours, neither does it mean days, it means months. And also, how could it be easier? Oh, the people then thought, what could we do to cut short this, let's say, hindrance to business activity? So instead of sending this gold and silver, what they did was, John uh, uh, write down, what do you call, instead of sending gold and silver, who the person in France, Albert, he wrote something. He told John, you owe me 100 gold or whatever. Pay that amount to Henry, whom I owe money, who is also in England. And he gave that letter not to John, he gave that letter to Henry, right? And he signed it. So what happens? There is no, what do you call, delivery of currencies or gold or silver uh, like the earlier days. He just sent that piece of paper to Henry. In turn, Henry took that paper and went to John and said, look here. This is a letter or a piece of paper where there's an order to you by Albert, who is in France, to pay this amount to me. That's all about, that is bill of exchange. Vinimay bill Agnya Panata. Bill of exchange ordinance. That is the law. That is the crux of bills of exchange ordinance and the origin of the practice why you need a bill of exchange. Right? So now, during this origin of all the rudimentary method which I mentioned, there were certain issues, there were certain hiccups along the way, and then what the people did was they went to courts and then they tried to settle those disputes. And when hearing this, like I said, this was a practice by the law of merchants. So after a while, even the courts of England recognized these practices as acceptable practices, and they gave it a value, you could call it, to ensure that this method of transacting is not hindered, so that there will be a smooth flow of the merchant activity. After no, those decisions of the courts became part of the law, right? That is how all these matters originated. Then the legal nature of negotiable instruments. I have sent already to the institute the negotiable, what do you call it, the bills of exchange ordinance, or else, if you all have not received it yet, what you could do is now you can download it from the internet. Just type bills of exchange ordinance for the moment, and then we will go through it. There are certain salient provisions of the bills of exchange ordinance as to know what it is, right? Before addressing the bills of exchange ordinance, right, I'm drawing your attention to the famous definition of a bill of exchange or a negotiable instrument given in an English case. You may write this down, or else I will also this thing, Crouch versus Credit Foncier of England Limited, 1873. Look how old this is. LR Queen's Bench, 3/374. Right? In this, it mentioned or defined what a negotiable instrument is. Where an instrument is by the custom of trade, transferable like cash by delivery, and is also capable of being sued upon by the person holding it. It is entitled to the name of a negotiable instrument, and the property in it passes to a transferee who has taken it for value in good faith. Now, students, it's very important that you understand each and every term which I mentioned here, because study of law requires you a great detail of attention to the exact words which we use. Right? Now, each and every word which I mentioned has a very large meaning, right? Now, from this definition, I'm taking your attention to these essential features. I'm hoping you all are getting your notes down, because these are the ingredients. These illustrations which I'm mentioning are not there in the bills of exchange ordinance or the acts of parliament. That's why you are here. So you jot down your notes to this effect. Now, from that definition, it says the property and rights in the negotiable instrument. For the moment you think a negotiable instrument is a piece of paper of the order which I mentioned, example which I mentioned a while ago, right? Passes by delivery. What do you mean by delivery? Just delivery, the simple English term. Alone. So the property and rights in the negotiable instrument passes by delivery alone. You don't need to mention anything else. By delivery alone, the property rights passes. Or by delivery and endorsement. Endorsement, we will see what the meaning of endorsement is in great detail. And you don't need any further evidence of transfer. Delivery alone, the property rights. How do you, in the normal parlance, how do you determine the property rights? For an example, you go to, what is a property end of the day? Property is anything, right? Whatever that you own, it may be your phone, or it may be your property, your vehicle, for that matter, anything that you can own. So how do you prove your ownership? For an example, let's say you went to the shop to buy a phone. What do? You go through whatever the things on the aisle or whatever in the showcase, and you ask or you look for the model that you require, and then you say, okay, how much it is? You say, okay, this is this amount, 50,000, 100,000 or whatever, and then you pay the money. Until you pay the money, is that property, the phone yours? No. But still, you paid the money and he gave you the phone. Would you just leave the shop like that? Would you? No, I don't think so. You would. What would you do? You would ask for something very important. What is that? The receipt and the warranty cards, right? Of course. If you don't have the warranty cards, or if you don't have the receipts, pardon me, there is no evidence that the property, the phone, was transferred in your name and you own the phone. Nothing is there. But for a bill of exchange, no, the receipt is something in addition to the phone. So, but when it comes to a bill of exchange, you don't need an additional document to show the property rights, right? What you would require is the mere delivery of the bill of exchange. That is enough. Do you understand that? Good. Now, holder of the instrument can sue in his own name. Whoever the holder of the bill of exchange can sue the other party, or whoever who gave the bill of exchange on in his own name, if he holds the property, right? No notice has to be given to the debtor. Now, a debtor is, and this is how you spell it, and I think you are aware of it. A debtor is the person who owns money or who is liable to pay you, right? So, no notice has to be given to the debtor in respect of the instrument. So, if you receive that, you don't have to give any notice to the effect that you are going to encash the bill of exchange. No, you don't require. But in normal practice, they do, right? It doesn't mean that you have to do that. Now, the other most important thing is, if you don't, quite apart from the lesson, if you don't understand anything, please do ask me, raise your hand or whatever, and do ask me any clarification. I'm more than happy to explain that. Now, the fifth thing that you can get from the above principle is that a negotiable instrument is transferred free of equities. What do you mean by that? It means that the transferee, now who is the transferee? Transferee is the person who receives it. Transferor, who gives it, from that to the transferee receives it. This is quite common in the legal language, right? So, transfer of goods, negotiable instrument is transferred free of equities, right? Which means the transferee gets a good title to the instrument, although the transferor's title was defective. Example, in the normal course, right? Let's say a person's any good. Let's take an example as the phone. Somebody steals your phone, and then that thief, let's say, sold it to somebody else, and the third party bought it with or without the knowledge that it was stolen property. Even if the chain goes for 10, 20, 40, 100 layers, still you have the ownership of the property or the title to the property as the owner, right? This is how bills of exchange and normal chattels or goods differs in their characteristics. If you take the same example, if it was a bill of exchange instead of a good, let's say your phone, your bill of exchange was stolen, right? And the holder now stolen, or for that matter, that person did not have the transferee, you gave it to the transferee, the receiver, the payee did not have a good title because you gave it in return of certain goods which you bought, but that was not in good order and condition, so that he won't have a good title to that bill of exchange. However, not knowing that, he has endorsed it to somebody else or transferred it to somebody else, right? What happens is, unlike that phone, that third party, write these terms down, is called a holder in due course, HDC, Yata Paridhi Dharakya, under the law of bills of exchange. He holds a good title to the bill of exchange. That is something unique to bills of exchange. Because if not for that character, this whole system of transacting through bills of exchange would collapse and it won't sustain for this law. Right? Right. Now, bills of exchange. Bills of exchange, the statutory scope, let's say. Now, it all started in England, like everything started off in England. In 1882, the Bills of Exchange Act was passed in England, right? Now, afterwards, all the colonies of England adopted the same, more or less the same Bills of Exchange statute. In Sri Lanka, it came in 1927, the Bills of Exchange Ordinance, number 25 of 1927. There were, apart from minor two amendments, our Bills of Exchange Ordinance from 1927 up to now, this is one of the most remarkable legislations which you see across the world, right? It was in fact drafted by this person called Chalmers in England, who was himself is a merchant, right? And the law book says Mackenzie Chalmers, right? Who drafted that in England? Who was a British civil servant, and he got so many commendations with regard to this bills of exchange, etc. Right? Now, Sri Lanka Bills of Exchange Ordinance, like I said, went through some minor two amendments. Apart from that, there were no amendments. With regard to Sri Lanka, you would know that our common law is the Roman Dutch law. But with regard to this law of contracts, we follow English law and English judicial decisions. Any important decisions of English courts on bills of exchange, we can readily adapt those cases, those decisions in Sri Lankan courts as well. So you know two words about that, right? Now, any examples of negotiable instruments, bankers? Examples of negotiable instruments. You all have mentioned checks. Check is one example, so don't write it down. Examples of negotiable instruments in Sri Lanka. It's okay to get it wrong. No one is going to penalize. So, examples of negotiable instruments. What are the examples? Check is one example. Treasury bills, very good. Krishni. Treasury bonds, so TBs. What else? Bank note. What is a bank note? What's a bank note? So checks is one. Bills of exchange is also one. There is a difference between those two. Promissory note, very good, very good. Okay. Promissory note. Bankers jargon, must I say. Some says promissory, it's promissory note, porondu patre. Some says the short form, pro note, but don't have any idea whatsoever what a pro note is. What else? Stocks. Stocks. How can stocks be a negotiable instrument? That's a question mark. What else? Drafts. ATM cards. ATM cards, is it a negotiable instrument? Can you give your ATM card to somebody else and say, no, why don't you go and withdraw? No, ATM card doesn't come under negotiable instruments. Bank drafts, yes, very good. What else? Right. So bearer debentures, treasury bills, you will have covered more or less the crux of all these things. Any bills of exchange? Now, bills of exchange are negotiable instruments, we say, right? What are the other bills of exchange that you would have, which are not negotiable? Bills of exchange. ATM cards would come under bills of exchange, or one could argue to that effect. Letters of credit, right, comes under bills of exchange. Now, what I'm going to discuss now or tell you all is very important or imperative for your knowledge as well as the exam. The meaning of the terms negotiability and transferability, right? These are two different things, right? Negotiability is one concept, transferability is another concept, right? But interchange seems synonymous or seems the same, but it is not the case because it's a common misunderstanding. We will try to see what's the difference in these two terms. Remember this: all negotiable instruments are transferable. All negotiable instruments are transferable, but all transferable things are not negotiable. What's the difference? If you are confused now, very good, which means you all are thinking about it, right? So that's how we learn. All negotiable instruments are transferable, but not all transferable instruments are negotiable. What in the world did I say? Right? Right. Let's see. Now, by now, you understand what you mean by we discussed earlier, passing of the title of a property. Remember the phone example? You paid cash, you bought the phone. So the title of the phone transferred to you, right? That's the title. So the transferability relates to the process of passing the title of an instrument. If you transfer something, the title passes, right? Now, only the fact you look at when it comes to transferability is about the title. Negotiability concerns of the quality of the title, right? You may your phone may be stolen, and the thief may have sold it to a third party, thereby transferred the title. So it's transferable. You see, the title was transferred. But the quality of that title is defective. You understand? Because it's stolen property, right? It's defective. Now, the term negotiability has a strict legal meaning. So let's see this. Now I gave you the example of the selling of the stealing, losing of your phone, and transferability of that title. You take that example, right? And now you can see it's freely transferable. However, the title, the quality of the title is not. There's a defect in that title. So the phone is a non-negotiable instrument. It cannot, no, the quality is not, quality of the title was not transferred, right? Now, when you look at, let's say, you take on the other hand, a banknote, like you all said, or a currency note. You take a currency note, and that you can consider as a negotiable instrument. For an example, let's say your 1,000 rupee note was fallen and somebody else picked it up and he gave it to somebody else. There is no issue with the transferability. There is no issue with the title as well. Why? The title is passed. The quality of title, there's no way of tracing the quality of the title. Whoever holds it has a good title to that. So that's the difference between transferability and negotiability. If the note is lost or stolen and come into the possession of a person who takes it in good faith, right? Not knowing that, this is stolen or something. The intention of good faith should be there. And for value, and is innocent, and he is freed from that defect in title. So he let's say he bought it. Again, you go to the other example, will you? Now this time, somebody steals money or robs a bank. Fancy that. And he has a bundle of cash. He goes to a phone shop and buys a new Apple phone, right? Stolen money. Does the shop owner knows this? No, he doesn't. He gives the cash, takes the phone and go. Thus, the title to that money is transferred to the shop owner. Yes, it has. He takes that in good faith, innocently, and he gives, there's a consideration of good for value for money passed, which is the phone. So now you understand the difference of negotiability and transferability. We will discuss about this negotiability and transferability further in the lesson because this comes quite often, right? And then I am taking your attention to the bills of exchange ordinance. I will take it from here, section 3, but I will show you the bills of exchange ordinance itself. Let's say, right. right? You can see this bills of exchange ordinance, right? Right. Now, this is imperative or utmost important for your syllabus as well as your day-to-day banking practice, right? Uh, Section 2 provides the interpretation or the definitions of what a bills of exchange is, the definition of other terms and terminologies which you come across in bills of exchange. One of the most important areas of a bill of exchange ordinance is section 3. Section 3 goes as this. If you have to buy hard disk, you may go ahead and buy hard disk. Read this not once, two or three times, maybe 20, 40, 50 times. Go ahead. You won't lose anything. Look at this. We will address this one by one. A bill of exchange is an unconditional order in writing, right? Addressed by one person to another, signed by the person giving it, requiring the person to whom it is addressed to pay on demand or at a fixed or determinable future time a sum certain in money to or to the order of a specified person or bearer. I hope you all are confused. Uh, it's a joke, right? So we have to now dissect this definition. It seemed to be a long definition, but it is not. It's written in plain English language, and we will dissect this and see what these terminologies are. So we said it's an unconditional order in writing, addressed by one person to another, signed by the person giving it, requiring the person to whom it is addressed to pay on demand or at a fixed determinable future time, a sum certain in money to or to the order of the person, specified person, or to the bearer, right? So any instrument which does not comply with these conditions which I just mentioned, or which orders any act to be done as this, is not a bill of exchange. Bear that in mind. That comes under section 3, subsection 2 of the bills of exchange ordinance, right? Then an order to pay out from a particular fund is not unconditional. It's a condition there itself. You can't say no. You have to, for example, you can't say, uh, uh, oh no, we will go through these conditions. Let's say unconditional order, right? Unconditional order. There must be an order. Order. What is an order? Anak, vidanayak, right? That's something in the nature of a command, such as like pay him. It's an order. Please pay him. It's an order. Can you pay him? No, it's not an order. It's a request. Would you be able to pay him? No. So courteousness, too much. It's not an order, right? It's a request only. A document reading, let's say, let me say something like this. I should be pleased if you would pay. It's not a bill of exchange, right? It's nothing to do with your pleasement, right? It's just a request. And also, it should be unconditional. Pondesi virahitava. No conditions attached to that, right? So it should be unqualified. So an order to pay out of a particular fund, like I told you, pay so and so rupees 1,000 from my current account was held not to be a unconditional order because there's a condition attached to that. You understand? What is the condition? Pay him from my that account, current account. What if the current account doesn't have money? That's an issue. Why are these conditions and rules are in existence to ensure there's a smooth flow of the merchants' activities or the business activities. If there are issues on these technical aspects, this whole concept of bills of exchange won't exist. Understand? Right? Then the order to be unconditional. I will give you certain other case laws which illustrated this whole concept of unconditional order, right? The phrase which I'm going to say, we hereby authorize you to pay on our account to the order of. I will repeat that. We hereby authorize you to pay on our account to the order of. It was held not to be an order in this particular case. Hamilton versus Pottis. In 1849. 49 E Exchequer, Chambers 200. Right? That phrase did not create a clear obligation to pay. The words, I should be obliged if you would arrange to pay, will also not qualify. So what was the original statement? We hereby authorize you to pay on our account to the order of. We hereby authorize you to pay. It's not a order. You authorize. So let's say I authorize you to do something. That doesn't mean you have to do that. That means you can do that. You understand? For it to be an order, I should say, do this. I'm ordering you to do this. It's not that you are authorized to do it. මම ඔබට බලය දෙනවා මේක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න. මට බලය තියෙනවා. ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන නොකරන එක මගේ වැඩ. So that's not an order. You understand the difference? And then the order must be unconditional. An unconditional order in writing. An order to pay the bank, an order to a banker to pay, provided the receipt form at foot hereof is duly signed, will not be a bill of exchange because there's a condition attached to that, right? Only, so the bank is authorized to pay only if the condition is fulfilled by the payee, right? Only by the payee, namely signing the form before the banker can pay. It's not an unconditional order. Now, if the drawer has requested the payee to do something without addressing such request to the drawee, look at this. If the drawer has requested the payee to do something without addressing such request to the drawee, first of all, who is the drawer? Let's say, who's the drawer? Right? Who's the drawer? Drawer is the person who writes or gives the order. Let me check whether I have mentioned that in yeah, so the drawer is the issuer of the bill of exchange, right? You could see this. Understood. payee of a bill is the person to whom the bill is payable, right? Drawer is the person who issues the bill. Pay is the person who to whom the bill is payable, right? So where were we? If the drawer has requested the payee to do something without addressing such request to the drawee is the person to whom the order is given, right? To pay. It will not make the bill a conditional order, right? For instance, look at this. The words, the receipt at the back hereof must be signed, which signature will be taken as an endorsement of this check, were held to be compatible with the characteristics of a bill of exchange. I'll give you the references. Etham versus right now you know and what is an unconditional means, what is an order means. So it's unconditional order in writing, right? Unconditional order. Now we see what you mean by writing. The whole of the order in the instrument must be in writing. The word writing includes typed, printed or written, right? Either in ink or pencil, that is more than enough, right? Section 2 interpretation says written includes printed and writing includes print, right? Signed by the person giving it. Signed by the person giving it. It means the bill must be signed by the drawer who is the issuer of the bill. Right? It is sufficient if the bill is signed by some duly authorized person on behalf of the owner as well. A bill is not considered as signed by the owner if the signature of the drawer is forged. It is forged, it's not his signature, so it is not signed by him, right? Or placed on the bill by someone without authority. So forged checks are not bills of exchange, right? I'll give a reference to that also. I'm giving these references so that you, out of interest, you could read this. Premier Pottery Limited. Eddie 1981-28 SSR 355. All these should be available on the internet, right? Now, so an unconditional order in writing, signed by the person giving it, right? Now we go to the next one, requiring the drawee to pay on demand. Requiring the drawee to pay on demand. This requirement refers to a time, right, of payment. The term used is to pay on demand, which means pay when I asked you or when I requested you to pay. Demanded. I'm taking your attention to section 10 of the Bill of Exchange Ordinance. Keep this as your Bible. Section 10. Not the section 10, the whole Bill of Exchange Ordinance. Right? a bill is payable on demand, which is expressed to be payable on demand or at site or on presentation, or in which no time for payment is expressed. Right? So, payment on demand. This one good thing about this bill of exchange ordinance is it's drafted in by a non-lawyer. You know, when lawyer starts to speak, you wouldn't understand. They use all these types of words, including myself, of certain things, which you might not understand. There's a reason for that. That is to ensure that there are no other interpretations that can be taken out from what they say, because that's what we do. But here, this was drafted by a layman, a normal businessman, not a businessman, rather a civil servant, like I said, Mackenzie Chalmers. Hence, this English is very simple. Bill is payable on demand. So we are now still talking about the definition, right? A bill is payable on demand, which is expressed to be payable on demand or at site or on presentation. So it says pay on demand, right? That's one thing. You don't have to say that payment on demand. If it says pay him, which means you have to pay it when you see it at site or on presentation, if it was presented to you, right? In which no time for or in which no time for payment is expressed, then it's payable on demand, right? Then payable on demand or at a fixed determinable future time. Look at that. It should be fixed. It should be determinable future time. You should be able to determine the future time, right? Now, apart from using the term pay on demand, the instrument or the bill of exchange can say that it should be paid at a fixed or determinable future time. What does it mean? It should be a period which is stipulated in the bill after a date or after sight, or after the occurrence of some event which is certain to happen. Can anyone? No, I will explain a little bit more. Then you can mention, right? Now, so if a document state expressed to be payable 6 days after the 6 days after the, let's say, happening of an event, which is sure to happen, let's say 6 days after this particular ship leaves Colombo Harbor. Is it a bill of exchange? It mentions about a time period. It mentions about happening of an event, right? But does it constitute or does it meet the requirements fixed determinable future time? Is it certain to happen? Now, that particular example was considered as not a bill of exchange because we wouldn't know for sure that that particular event might happen. So this was discussed in versus 1873 for AJR 161, right? So I'm giving you all these references so that you also will be in a better position to understand when you read the illustrations as to what it means by a fixed determinable future time, right? Now, you would say that as per section 10, which we read a while ago, section 10.2, where a bill is accepted or endorsed, I'm reading section 10.2, or endorsed when it is overdue, it shall, as regards the acceptor who so accepts or any endorser who so endorses it, be deemed to be a bill payable on demand. So, once it is accepted or endorsed, it will be converted into a bill payable on demand. 11.1 says, payable at a determinable future time, within the meaning of this ordinance, which is expressed to be payable at a fixed period after date of sight or on a fixed period after the occurrence of a specified event which is certain to happen, though the time of happening may be uncertain. So time of payment may be uncertain, the time of happening may be uncertain, but it is certain to happen. A bill which is payable on or before a given date is bad, right? A bill which is payable on or before the given date, because the date of payment may be any date between the date of drawing and the last date of payment. Understand? A bill which is payable on or before a given date is bad. So you can't have such type of a bill of exchange, right? An instrument expressed to be payable on a contingency is not a bill. And the happening of the event even does not take out that defect, right? So you can if you say when I marry so and so will not satisfy the requirement of a determinable future time, obviously, right? Even the fact even the drawer got married, right? Because it's not a sure thing, to put it very simply. So I hope all of you all understood. We are still at determining the characteristics of bills of exchange, right? And the what do you call ancillary aspects of that. We haven't still gone into the uses and the law relating to the usage and the technicalities of bills of exchange. So if you have not understood something, please do raise and ask your question from me, right? Then we go, still at the definition, a sum certain in money. When you say a sum certain in money, section 9, I'm drawing your attention. Sum payable, right? Says that the sum payable is certain, although it is required to be paid with interest by stated installments, with the provision that upon default in payment of an installment, the whole shall become due, and according to an indicated rate of exchange or according to a rate of exchange to be ascertained as directed by the bill, right? Now, in order to pay a fixed sum, like this, if it says and all bank charges or and costs, now it is not a sum certain because we wouldn't know unless we specify that, right? It's not considered as a sum certain in money. This was highlighted in Standard Bank of Canada of Wiley in 1919, 19 SR NSW 3 in page 384, right? Right. Then the next one is it should be payable to or to the order of a specified person or to bearer. And listen to this. It should be payable to a person or to the order of the person or to the bearer. Three things. A specified person. Pay X. Specified person. It fulfills that condition. Or the order of that specified person. For example, pay X or order. Gevanu X taho anaparidi. You've seen these types, right? Pay X or to the order. The third one, bearer, it says pay X O to the bearer. Pay or given extra ho raganennata. Bearer. These are the three types, right? Of these, the first and the second are order bills, and the third is a bearer bill. A bill may be drawn payable to or to the order of the drawer himself. How could you do that? Now I have a checkbook. I can write if I am the I have it's a checkbook or a bill of exchange. I can say pay Rangaliyanige. It's an order given to the drawer, right? Drawer himself. So rather the drawee himself, given by the drawer. Payee also the drawer. And the same and happen when a person draws a check payable to self, right? And also a bill may be drawn payable to or to the order of the drawee. They are the payee and the drawee itself are the same one and the same person. This may happen where, for example, I have money in a particular bank, let's say Sampath Bank or HNB or whatever, and I have a loan in the same bank. A loan that I want to settle. Then I can give a check to HNB, HNB check, pay HNB at a national bank PLC, right? The drawer and the payee and the drawee are the same person, right? Any questions? I am going on and on. This is a bit of a technical area. If you don't understand something, please do ask me. Otherwise, we can proceed. Now, what types of if you all can help me out here, have you seen checks like this? Pay, cash. Have you seen? Now, yeah. Now put it to the definition which I mentioned. Go to section 3. Right? Go to section 3. Right. A bill of exchange is an unconditional order in writing. Right? I could say whether you could. Oh, you could. Wait, give me a moment. Right? So, give me a moment. So, right. New note. Right? So you are seeing and check. So I'm going to show you this check. Right? Right. Let me just bear with me this technical glitch. I'm going to draw this bill of exchange. It's, let's say the drawer is HNB Bank, pay someone or order rupees, let's say 1 million. I will show this to you. 1 million. Right? Order 1 million. So then you get the signature part. Signature. Then you get the check numbers, check number, bank, branch code. Right. Can you all see the screen? Right, good. Okay. Now, if I mention here cash, right? Give it a moment, the internet, it will be sync. So the drawer here is HNB Bank, right? Amount is 1 million, also in words and also in figures. It says order, signature is there. So this is the basic check, right? Yes. Now, tell me whether, give me a moment, right? Tell me, have you seen these types of checks? Have you seen these types of checks? Have you seen? We need to understand not only the law, no, we need to understand the practice as well. So I come to your bank. I remember you. We have Sampath Bank, HNB, Commercial, NDB also, right? You never know. I might visit whoever who I come across. I have quite a lot of students I come across, and sometimes out of just for the fun of it, I check, right? So if I come like this with this check, have you seen these types of checks? Cash checks, you all said yes. What is this open checks, Krishni? Pay cash, have you seen? Right? So, no, not open. What do you mean by open checks? Okay, just think simply that I come to your branch, right? I take my checkbook, right? My checkbook essentially is like this, right? My checkbook is like this, and so all the basic requirements are there, right? All the basic requirements are there. If I give the teller this check. Will the teller, okay, obviously I have funds in my account, right? Will the teller give me or honor the check or not? Okay, I'm getting answers. Others? Will the teller what do you call honor the check or not? Why? Yes or no? Dilshan, Dilshan, Uvinya. Yes or no? Reason for your answer. What's the reason? You need to understand this. Otherwise, this is an area, if you don't answer and clarify, you wouldn't get it. That's why I'm asking this and insisting on this much and taking the trouble through all this. Oh my God, come on, seriously. It's because not because okay, no, okay, fine. It's signed, right? Ranga DNL, right? It's signed. You will see it in a moment. It's signed. Okay, non-cross can be encashed. Okay, fine. You will see the signature in a moment. What else? All right, it's signed now. What else? Why? Huh? Because, okay, so Ovinia, because not signed, doesn't non-cross can be encashed. Okay, fine, fine. What else? Bankers, keep in mind, I'm also an examiner here. So this is what I am trying to inculcate this knowledge to your head. This is the same standard we will be scrutinizing the papers. So unless you get it wrong now, you will get it wrong in the exam. Choice is yours. Why? People. So can it doesn't matter whether it goes to my account. It doesn't matter whether it goes to comes to my hand, whether I can encash it or not over the counter. My simple question: don't worry about crossings, right? For the moment, right? Worry about only these little things that we discussed up to now. We haven't. We late. Most we did was we went up to section 11. Quite a lot of sections to go, my dear. So tell me. So Dilshan says not crossed can be encashed. Uvinya, yes. Oh, only these? Dinisha, Janani, Krishni Manatunga. Open checks. I think this is the terminology of the bankers. Probably, yes, open checks. Open checks. Oh, I will give you something like this. Uh, pay. How do you take this? In a moment, you will see. Can you pay a check like this? So pay cash, you said it's open checks. And if it's like this, can you pay? Pay Spider-Man or order. One of these days, students, I will for sure come to the branch, banks, and test this knowledge. Can you pay this check? Can. Uvinya, okay, fine. Can. Can. Others? Very good, Dilshan. Very good. Right. I'm going to do a little bit of little bit of a change here, right? And so Dilshan says, if it is an order check, only Spider-Man can encash, right? I accepted your answer as a layman, but what do you call legality said no. I will explain like this. If it's like this, so Dilshan says, if it's an order check, only Spider-Man can encash. Who is Spider-Man? You don't know. It's fictitious character. Pay Spider-Man or bearer. If it's a bearer check, the bank have to encash this. This is the whole concept of all this, what do you call, drawn payable to. Who is the person payable to? So again, coming back to this definition, unconditional order in writing addressed by one person to another, right? So it should be addressed by one person to another person, signed by the person giving, requiring the person to whom it is addressed to pay on demand or at a time some certain money to the order of a specified person. Order of a specified person, not to bearer. So Spider-Man is not a specified person, right? Because it is bearer only that you can encash it. So checks of this sort, like cash, if it's an order check, it's not a valid bill of exchange. If it's a bearer check only, it becomes a valid bill of exchange because it's a what do you call a bearer check, right? So very good. I hope everybody understood this simple example. Right. Okay. Right. Right. Now, then we come to the second important thing, the next important thing, inland and foreign bills, right? A bill which purports or which intends to be payable in Sri Lanka or drawn in Sri Lanka upon some person resident therein is an inland bill. Any other bill is a foreign bill. This is mentioned in section 4 of the Bills of Exchange Ordinance. I will show this to you, right? Have anyone come across a foreign bill? Normally, you would come across, for an example, if there are, let's say, a customer of yours who holds an account in Sri Lanka, let's say, holds shares in I'm just giving an example, right? Who holds shares in a overseas company, right? Overseas company, and that company declares dividends. That dividends will be issued by way of a check, drawn on a foreign bank, and will be posted to the customer's address here. Customer can, deposit that. Of course, there will be a clearing cycle, but that is a foreign bill insofar as that is concerned. Then, who can draw bills of exchange? Bills of exchange, right? Now, Capacity of the parties. You would have come across, or you would have already learned by now, the capacity of the parties, the laws on capacity of the parties, laws of contracts, and the laws of contracts. Not everyone can enter into a contract. So, issuing a bill of exchange is a contract, right? So, can everyone enter into that contract? No. Then there should be a capacity for you to enter into the contract. We will see a capacity to incur liability as a party to a bill is it's coexisting, right? Then section 22 capacity of the parties. Remember these sections. What's the best thing to do is get the printout of the bills of exchange ordinance. Then I am in the habit of taking printouts, maybe old school, but then again works for me. As whatever you follow, whatever that works for you, right? It may be this or something else, and highlight it and keep it yourself. For some they work with short notes. Never work for me. Never work with short notes. But some people find it very amusing. Capacity, section 22(1), capacity to incur liability as a party to a bill is coextensive with capacity to contract, right? Where such capacity is to be determined by the law of Sri Lanka, it shall be determined by Roman Dutch law, as administered in Sri Lanka, subject to provisions of any enactment affecting that law, provided that nothing in this section shall enable a corporation to make itself liable as drawer, acceptor, or endorser of a bill unless it is competent to it so to do under the law for the time being in force relating to the operations. We will see what this means. Now, this requirement is one example where the English law governing bills of exchange and checks in Sri Lanka was superseded. Now you know by now very well that the law of contracts are governed by English law, and bills of exchange is part of law of contracts governed by English law. Hence, we have the bills of exchange ordinance that was which we adopted from the Bills of Exchange Act of 1892 in England, right? Now, in Sri Lanka, here, now you saw section 22, it supersedes English law and it incorporates Roman Dutch law there, right? If there is any doubt as to the capacity for a person to draw a bill of exchange or check, that doubt must be resolved by applying the principles of Roman Dutch law, not English law, right? Now, not only that, what else in Sri Lanka, right? In Sri Lanka, now give me examples of capacity to contract. I will give you the first example. Age. Give me the rest. This is something you will have all done by now. What? Capacity to contract. Age is one of such capacities. So if you are not in the age of majority, above the age of majority, they say you can't enter into a contract, valid contract in certain instances. What else? I'll give you another one. Soundness of mind. Remember, soundness or unsoundness of mind, or you call it lunacy. Lunacy. What else? Capacity to contract. Physical capability. Physically capable. If you are physically capable, if you are physically incapable, still you can enter into contract. For an example, if you are like, you can't walk or write or whatever, still that won't be an issue. So physical incapability, unless you are in vegetative state, right? Mentally incapable, correct? So soundness and unsound of mind, correct. Monthly salary, monthly salary, monthly salary, monthly. No, when you say monthly salary, capacity to contract doesn't necessarily mean. Now I know why you said monthly salary. That is your what do you call it? Bankers. What do you call standards of issuing checkbooks and stuff like that. No, I'm going to the most preliminary stuff. A contract is an agreement entered into between two or more parties. So any contract of any simple contract, right, comes into this. Unconscious, drunk or something, yeah. So that comes this under soundness of mind. You are not sound in mind during that intoxication. What else? What else? There are so many things. These you as the bank should be very well aware of it, because I know personally I have encountered uh, about 3 of these instances during with my experience of certain what do you call somewhat different areas where the bank was held liable. And I must tell you bankers, because now you all are my students, I must mention these matters to you. Whenever you discharge your duties, discharge them with fullest of responsibility, which one thing is that is expected of you. And when you discharge that with the fullest of responsibility, what do you mean by responsibility? The ability to respond, right? You are expected to discharge your duties with integrity. So whenever you take a decision to do something, be 100% assured that it is the correct thing to do. If not, it's better you get the confirmation from the others. That doesn't mean to say that you need to pass the ball. Don't ever do that. After bills of exchange, I will do duty of secrecy. Duty of secrecy, the topic duty of secrecy, was it done for you? I don't think so. If it is not, we will cover it. Now, know the limits. Those who are almost found guilty in front of laws on ongoing cases. I'm sorry, I cannot understand that comment. For capacity of contract. Okay. Those who are almost found guilty in front of laws on ongoing cases. That's a different way of looking at it. But then again, sometimes you have heard this saying, maybe not 100% true. It says just because you did it doesn't mean you are guilty, right? Within quotes, smiley. Now, what I'm trying to say is, even you as a bank staff discharge a duty, end of the day, you will be the world, I will put it that way. where they will hold you responsible, or you will be held responsible for what you did or what you didn't do. So look how important what I said, what you did or what you didn't do. So act or omission, both. So capacity to contract essentially mean, this is where I'm coming from, there are certain defects or deficiencies in capacity to contract. Age, unsound of minds, lunacy, then intoxication, like you said. Yes, there is something else in Sri Lanka when you are living in Sri Lanka. What about personal laws? Does it affect capacity to contract? Yes or no? Does personal laws? Okay, how? Dilshan, I'm assuming you are in a better position than others to answer. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Why would you say personal laws have an effect on capacity to contract? Person should be natural, yes, but not exactly. No. Personal laws doesn't mean about that. This is a generic advice to all the students here present now, and whoever who watches this video later on as well. Please be in touch with what you study on a daily basis. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. This subject law is not difficult itself unless you don't have an interest in it or a passion to get through this. It's imperative that we understand this subject. That's why we have made it mandatory that you pass this, that you sit for this exam, because it's essential part and parcel of what you do and you don't do. Person should be natural. No, personalities, different types of persons, natural persons and legal persons. Even legal persons have capacity to enter into contract. It's not about that. I will explain. There are certain personal laws in Sri Lanka. What are the personal laws? Kandyan law, you get Muslim laws, you get Tesa Valame laws, then Mukwar in some parts of the island, laws, so to speak, right? So now Kandyan is a personal as well as a territorial law. These areas I'm reiterating, you have already covered, right? Uh, now, then Muslim law is a personal law which is applicable only to the followers of Islam. It's not a territorial law. Tesa Balame law is a personal as well as a territorial law. It's applicable to all the Jaffna inhabitants. Inhabitants means whose origin is from Jaffna Peninsula. Plus, that's the personal part of it. So it's applicable to Tamils from who's living in Jaffna, and for Tamils who was originated in Jaffna, who is now living in southern part of the island. That's the personal part of Tesa Valamilo. Then it's also a territorial law where the Tesa Valame laws are applicable to the Jaffna Peninsula, the lands over there, irrespective of whether it's owned by a Tamil or whatever the race. Even if a Sinhalese own a land in Jaffna, they are subject to Tesa Valame. Right? So, as an example, how this capacity of the parties, I will draw your attention. Under Tesa Valame law, a female or a woman is considered as a minor. What do you call a married woman is considered as a minor, meaning she can't enter into a contract alone, right? She has to get the consent of her husband. So if she wants to buy a property, or if she wants to sell a property, not buying a property you won't sign, but if you want to sell a property, her husband also should sign. How can this affect a banker? If she wants to sell the property and let's say mortgage it, you as the banker needs to ensure that the husband also have signed the documents. If not, it's not valid. Do you understand? So same thing goes for bills of exchange, right? So much uncertainty can arise on the question as to who can be a party to a bill of exchange. Who should sign? Now, so you all need to be careful. You need to ensure whenever you are drawing this, or after if you're taking any action on that, to see or to know the background of the party, right? Such as Kandyan, Thesavalami or Muslim laws, right? So the bank must make sure that the other party has contractual capacity. If that party doesn't have contractual capacity, you cannot. If you are not certain, always ask the questions. That's completely fine. Always ask the question. For an example, there may be a Tesavalami person who, I'm giving you a very, not hypothetical, this was an actual incident which I came across, which they sought legal opinion. The person was subject to Tesavalami. She bought the land and mortgaged it to the bank. Husband also has signed. And now she wanted, now was there, the facility was given. And after about 5 years or 6 years, he has sold that property and she wanted another facility from the bank where only she has signed it. The bank asked for her husband's signature. She said, at that time she was divorced. Then you don't need. So these questions, correct questions, the banker should ask. That doesn't mean, my dear students, that you need to make the life of the customer hell by asking 101 questions, relevant and irrelevant both. Right? You need to ask the correct question at the correct time. Right? Just because to save your, let me put it this way, what do you call, rather, responsibilities and your job and the duties doesn't mean you not do something. Because if you do a wrong thing and you don't do the correct thing, you are liable for both. Right? Then we come to consideration. This is something you have already studied. So tell me, what is consideration? Sorry. What's consideration? What is consideration? You all studied this during the law of contracts, if I'm not mistaken. What's consideration? What are the essential ingredients in a contract? Consideration is one of them. Right? Consideration, or in Sri Lanka you call valuable consideration. right? In Sinhala, you call consideration pratishtava, valid reason. More than that, valid reason, pratishtavak, right? Agana pratishtava, valuable consideration. Yes, good. All parties must contribute to the contract. How do you do that? It could be a monetary thing or non-monetary thing as well. That's how you do it. Pratishtava, I can't write that. So consideration is something what you give in return to what you get, right? If there is no consideration, there is no valid contract in Sri Lanka. That is under English law because all the law of contracts are governed under the English law, like I said earlier. And however, in Roman Dutch law, you don't have that concept. You don't need consideration. You only need justa causa, right? RDL, no need of consideration, only justa causa or just cause is what you need, right? You will see that in a moment, what I've written down. Then, a valuable consideration for a bill may be constituted by, right, any consideration which by the law of England is sufficient to support a simple contract. An antecedent debt or liability. Antecedent, not precedent. Such a debt or liability is deemed valuable consideration whether the bill is payable on demand or at a future time. Section 27 of the Bills of Exchange Ordinance will explain this. Any right antecedent debt or liability. Generally, you need to understand the nature of the consideration is not mentioned on the face of the bill. There it does not say, no, it's only a, well, let's say for an example check, it doesn't say why you are giving the check for. The words for value received, for an example, in a receipt of that sort, which are commonly used to indicate the consideration, is not there in the bill of exchange. So the absence of the mention that value was given, so the absence of mentioning the value which was given does not render the bill invalid, right? Section 3(4). A bill is not invalid by reason that it is not dated, that it does not specify the value given, or that any value has been given therefore. That it does not specify the place where it is given. So you not mentioning the value does not render the bill invalid, right? So this is how you call consideration, right? Under English law, it's consideration. It's called pratishtava, valuable consideration, agana pratishtava. That is how the law of contracts in Sri Lanka is governed under. And then under Roman Dutch law, you don't need consideration or valuable consideration. What you need is justa causa. I presume you all have, you all are aware of it by now, justa causa or just cause, because I presume this is covered under law of contracts. Right? Now, I told you consideration is a requirement of English law. Right? Right. Now, we will lastly just check the different parties which we just touched upon a while ago of a check. Right? Drawer of a bill of exchange. Drawer of a bill is the person who is drawing it. Engages that on due presentment it shall be accepted and paid according to its tenor, and that if it is be dishonored, he will compensate the holder or any endorser who is compelled to pay it, provided that the requisite proceedings on dishonor be duly taken. Section 55. Liability of the drawer. So it is on this section which is mentioned who a drawer of a bill is. Engages that on due presentment it shall be accepted and paid according to its tenor, and that if it is be dishonored, he will compensate the holder of any endorser who is compelled to pay it. So this is the liability, right? Then is precluded. The drawer is precluded from denying to a holder in due course the existence of the payee and his then capacity to endorse. You cannot, right? So there's a huge liability on the drawer of the bill. He is liable to the whole chain of title of the endorsers as well as the holder of the bill. Drawee is the person on whom the bill is drawn. Person whom the bill is drawn. Section 53. A bill of itself does not operate as an assignment of funds in the hands of the drawee available for the payment thereof. And the drawee of a bill who does not accept as required by this ordinance is not liable on the instrument. Right? Right. Who does not accept, if the drawee does not accept the bill, is not liable on the instrument. So if the drawee accepts, the law implies that he will pay it according to the method of his acceptance. Okay? So the drawee who accepts a bill is also called the acceptor. But in common parlance, that is there in the bills of exchange. But nowadays, it's very hardly that you see people using bills of exchange. It's only very common that they use the checks. So for insofar as checks are concerned, you don't need a separate acceptance. Those are payable on demand, on presentment. Right? Right. Accommodation party to a bill is a person who has signed a bill as a drawer, right? Who has signed a bill as a drawer, acceptor or endorser without receiving value therefore, for the purpose of lending his name to some other person. Section 28(1). An accommodation party is liable on the bill to a holder for value, and it is immaterial whether when such holder took the bill, he knew such party to be an accommodation party or not. So this may be a person who, who could be a drawer, acceptor or drawer, or endorser without receiving value therefore. A person who is holding the office of a particular authority, who signed the bill, right? Who signed the bill, maybe as the drawer, or who is liable to pay on the bill by virtue of the office he or she is holding, right? So those are the parties to the bill. Payee, of course, you know who the person receives, the person who receives the money is the payee, right? So we will wind up for today. From there and continue next week from here. All right. Okay. So if you didn't understand anything, you can of course write to me on this and post your questions. I will do my best to revert. Right. So have a pleasant evening. Thank you very much.